Good morning and welcome. I'm Carol Plumlee, a member of the Board of Trustees at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Reston. Whether you are on Zoom or here in the church sanctuary, we are so glad you are with us this morning. I'm grateful to be back in the sanctuary to enjoy this lovely service and see a lot of you in person. No matter how old or how young you are, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, however you identify and whomever you love, know you are welcome here. On behalf of UUCR, thank you to everyone who attended the gala last night, and thank you to the Stewardship Committee for your hard work in making it a great success. The Stewardship campaign will continue until March 30th, and so get your pledges in. My husband Jeff and I decided to increase our monthly contribution this year in support of the church as our beloved spiritual home and for the exceptional work it does for its members and the local and larger global community. We have collected over $5,700 so far for Ukrainian relief, and checks can still be sent into the office this week if you wish to participate in this humanitarian effort for the people of Ukraine. I hope people are as generous with their annual pledges and with this coming Sunday's already scheduled Charity of the Month for Rossi, refugees and asylum seekers. We are currently helping 4 to 5 families through this fund. Reverend Scott.
Even as our minds, hearts, and purses are preoccupied by heartbreaking world events like Ukraine, the opening of our annual all-important stewardship campaign and the excitement of the upcoming ministerial search for your permanent new minister, there is yet another ongoing effort to recognize that UUCR celebrated its 50th birthday in 2020. The pandemic limited our celebration of this significant milestone to a single worship service that year. However, the 50th Celebration Committee never stopped hoping and working on ways to acknowledge this important anniversary. 2 celebratory projects will be going forward this church year, which will call for contributions from members and friends. First, a yearbook will be created titled UUCR at 50, Past, Present, and Future, which can be purchased or accessed online. The 50th Committee will collect written and photo memories, descriptions of many rich ways we all enjoy today the life of our beloved community and our shared hopes and dreams for its future. We will also assemble items and materials to be placed into a time capsule to be closed this year and stored to be reopened for our 75th birthday in 2045. A treasure box large enough to hold whatever we want to bequeath to our descendants has been purchased and is ready now for your contributions. Please add to all of your other preoccupations ideas of what you and your family might contribute to these 2 projects of memory and hope. Thank you.
Our service today is being led by Reverend Scott Alexander. We are joined this morning by Linda Weaver, our Director of Religious Education, and Jesse Leong, our accompanist. Cynthia Young, our music director, is not here today, but planned the music for today's service. We are pleased to have Reverend Julie Price with us today to lead the hymns and share her lovely voice with us for the postlude. We are happy to have UCR member Tim Norton with us today as a special guest musician. Also here today is Lesley Tyson, who is serving as the worship associate. Kayla Williams is serving as the chat usher. Ron Bracey, Maggie Mack, David Nemi, Mike Schmidt, and Amelia Turner are running the technical side of worship. Thank you all for participating in today's worship service. Now, let us center ourselves for worship. Please take some deep, quieting breaths with me. Let us enter our time of worship together as we listen to Prelude number 1 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Tim Norton.
Well, look at all you bright and clever people who remembered to set your clocks forward an hour last night. You remember the old anthem, fall back, spring forward. Let's not try to be too judgmental to those 5 or 6 people, no doubt, who will show up at 11 o'clock expecting the 10 o'clock service. We will welcome them for coffee, but not for the 10 o'clock service. But you know, you think about it, this whole daylight savings thing is really a misnomer, a spiritual misnomer, because you can't really ever save daylight. You can only use it as it flies by every day. Each day we awake, we have, whether you know it or not, only a certain amount of precious daylight at our disposal, which varies seasonally. Daylight. Daylight which allows us to work and play, to see the beauty of creation and, yes, one another, to touch life around us in these waking hours, to serve justice and make something meaningful of our lives. So welcome to this day of daylight, and don't try to somehow save it. Rather, use it as a Unitarian Universalist to humanize and beautify your life and every life around you. Welcome.
Good morning. It is so wonderful to be with you here in person, and for those of you joining us online. To keep everyone safe here in this room, we ask that you not sing along, but you can hum quietly along, and please do follow our hymn number 4 in the gray hymnal, I Brought My Spirit to the Sea. And if you are joining us online, you can sing as loud as you want. my spirit to the sea. I stood upon the shore, I gazed upon infinity, I heard the waters roar. And then there came a sense of peace, some whisper calmed my soul, some ancient ministry of stars had made my spirit whole. I brought my spirit to the trees that loomed against the sky. I touched each wandering careless breeze to know if God was nigh. And then I felt an inner flame that fiercely burned my tears. Upright I rose from bended knee to meet the asking ears.
Good morning. It is so good to see your faces this morning with the light pouring in. Our chalice lighting words this morning come from Lesley Takahashi. Here in this place of peace, may we find hope. Here in this place of connection, may we find life-giving community. Here in this place of rest, let the unrest of our hearts turn us toward justice. Here in this space, made sacred by memories of connection, let us each feel ourselves part of the new that grows from the old in the spiraling unity of years. Do you want me to?
Each Sunday, we intentionally recommit to each other by singing our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. We will play our virtual choir and congregation video. Please sing along if you're at home. The words will be in the video. And if you're visiting us for the first time this morning, please accept this as our blessing to you.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to speak truth in love, and to help one another in fellowship.
Good morning. It is wonderful to see you here in the sanctuary and to have you join us on Zoom. Our story this morning is about a little boy named Theodore. He lived on a farm in Massachusetts with his 10 brothers and sisters. 10, can you imagine? That's a lot, isn't it? One day, he walked around the farm with his father, as he did often. He picked up a stick and he probably drew in the dirt while his father checked on some cows and some sheep and made sure the fences were all standing. This day, when they got to the far edge of the farm, his father said, "I have more to do. It's going to be longer than I expected. Do you think you can go ahead and go home by yourself? You remember the way? And Theodore said, "Yes, I remember the way," and he headed home. After he'd walked a while, he found saw a pond, and there on the side of the pond was a bush with flowers so bright it looked like it was on fire. He walked up a little closer, and when he did that, he noticed a turtle on the side of the pond in the sun on a rock. When he saw the turtle, he remembered seeing some older kids who threw rocks at birds and tried to hit squirrels with sticks. And he thought it might be fun to find out what happened if he hit the turtle with his stick. So he held his stick high over his head, and something stopped his arm. And then he heard a voice say, "It is wrong." He looked around. There was no one there. So he raised his stick again, and he heard, "It is wrong." That surprised him, so he dropped his stick and ran home. When he got home, he ran to his mother, and he told her about the turtle and the stick and the voice he had heard. And he said, "Mom, what could that voice be?" And she said, "Some people call that conscience. I like to call it the voice of God in your soul. If you listen to it and follow it, it will get stronger and stronger, and it will be a guide for you. If you don't listen to it and don't follow it, it'll get quieter and quieter and go away." Well, Theodore listened to this voice, whether it was his conscience, God, or his own understanding of right and wrong. And when the boy, Theodore Parker, became an adult, he became a Unitarian minister, and he spoke up and acted on what he knew to be right and just, including helping people running away from slavery and supporting women's right to vote. I wonder what that voice inside of you, whether it's conscience, God, or your understanding of right and wrong, is calling you to do. And I think Reverend Scott will be talking more about understandings of God and perhaps that little voice also today. And children who are in 8th grade or below, you can come with me to your class.
So now is the time in our service when we share our joys and concerns so that no one ever has to hold them alone. If you are joining us remotely this morning, you may wish to light a real or virtual candle wherever you are to mark what is on your heart. As the members of the in-house congregation this morning, some 60 of you almost, come forward if you wish, and Lesley will hand you the wand and help you light a candle for what is on your heart. And if you do share something remotely in the chat, please remember that that is public, so other people will see it. And then read, if you're online, each other's joys and sorrows, and enter into your own time of reflection and prayer, as we will hear in the sanctuary as we listen to the meditation music. Let us join in oneness in prayer. Spirit of life and love that animates our creation, we are grateful for this community that is so faithfully with us in both times of joy and sorrow. Our hearts especially goes out to all those who are heartbroken today, most especially the millions of people of Ukraine who are suffering such senseless heartbreak, senseless heartbreak from young to old. It is a terrible stain on the human heart. And for anyone who faces illness or disability or trouble in their family, we extend our prayers to you. Whether shared here this morning or held silently in our hearts, may our joys be multiplied in community, and may all here find comfort and calm and reassurance this hour. Amen.
The second Sunday of each month is our dedicated offering to an organization chosen by Social Justice and Action Committee. All of today's offering, except for pledge payments, which should be clearly marked, will go to the Refugee, Asylum Seeker, and Immigrant Subcommittee of the UUCR Social Action and Justice Committee. Rossi provides financial support to 4 immigrant families in Northern Virginia. Families are carefully vetted before being admitted to the program, and the level of need is reevaluated on an ongoing basis. The subcommittee is also currently helping one family member with deportation hearings. Rossi's subcommittee help is separate from our assistance to Afghan refugees. Those of you here in the sanctuary can make your donation in the collection basket that will be passed. Those joining us on Zoom may make their donation at the link in the chat box. You may also mail a check to the church with Rossi noted in the memo. Thank you for your support of the Rossi Subcommittee and its important work in our community.
The special music this morning is I Will Sing with the Spirit by John Rudder. This is a virtual choir video that we made last year, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
I will sing with the Spirit. I will sing with the Spirit. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Even though it was more than 50 years ago, I will never forget this moment for as long as I live. All of a sudden, in an otherwise ordinary moment of my life, I suddenly encountered something I can only call God, and that has made all the difference in my life. It was late October in 1972, and I, as a 22-year-old minister in training, was to attend a 3-day UU ministerial study group at a conference center located at Pierre Marquette State Park, located in the rolling countryside of Illinois at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Illinois rivers. Have anyone been there? At least 3 of you have been there. That day, I was at a particularly hard crossroads in my life. I had just completed my first 2 grueling months of a year-long live-in hospital chaplaincy at the City of Memphis Hospitals, a massive, run-down, multi-building inner-city hospital cobbled together with walkways that I had chosen because I wanted to learn ministry in a very demanding context. I was living in a dark and dingy hospital dorm room with one grimy window that looked out on the alleyway that led to the emergency room, an overwhelmed emergency room where I worked long and trauma-filled shifts. In those 2 intense months, I'd been repeatedly exposed to many of the worst brutalities and tragedies of life. A baby lying dead and blue on a hospital gurney, shaken to death by a frustrated father. A young woman repeatedly stabbed and disfigured by a jealous and vengeful boyfriend. A motorcyclist burned almost beyond recognition in a fiery highway crash. A storekeeper shot dead through the head for $6 of cash register change. And a wonderful young father of 4 suddenly gone after suffering a massive and unexpected heart attack while driving to work one morning. Even a mass shooting that fall where a crazed gunman had killed 5 of his neighbors and 2 police officers. My long shift as a hospital chaplain was forcing me to look at the worst of human depravity and sorrow square in the face. And I was spiritually struggling that autumn to keep all the pain and violence and negation of that emergency room from absolutely overwhelming my spirit. Although I wasn't really aware of it at the time, in hindsight, I realized that autumn my faith in the goodness and beauty of humanity in the world was slowly being eroded under the weight of all the brutalities that I was witnessing. But that Monday, after another tough weekend at the hospital, I drove alone in my little blue American Motors Javelin car, remember those? The 200 miles to the rustic conference center, unable to chase from my mind all of the images of the emergency room back in Memphis. I arrived at the park in early afternoon, only vaguely aware of how my heart and soul were reeling in shock over the unending heartbreak and sorrow I was dealing with day in and day out. When I got out of the car, in contrast to what I was feeling inside, it was an absolutely beautiful autumnal day. With a sky so blue it made your eyes ache, the clouds were pure puffy white, the air crisp and cool and invigorating, and the gentle rolling hills were covered with trees, as in that scene you see next to me, ablaze in red and orange and yellow. Somehow, intuitively sensing I needed to be alone to get my spiritual bearings if I could, rather than join the other ministers, the old guys, who had already gathered in the lodge and were laughing loudly as they swapped stories, jokes, and yes, a bit of scotch in the afternoon and cigars, I rather put on a flannel shirt in my room, blue jeans, and a pair of running shoes and headed up the hill alone, high, that overlooked the merging rivers, all by myself. The climb was steep and invigorating, and in no time I was at the very top of the hill, taking in the absolutely spectacular view of the merging rivers below and the miles of rolling, seemingly unending farmland and woods that were laid out like a fancy tableau table before me. I quietly sat down in the wind-tossed and waving yellow grass that was at the top of that hillside, and with my heart still so heavy for all the sorrow I had left behind in Memphis, I sat there silently taking in the world that was all around me, including suddenly a vast and majestic V of geese that were so close to my head flying over the top of the hill, I could see their delicate little feet tucked under their bellies. Suddenly, I was filled with a powerful sensation that absolutely overwhelmed me. In one holy and miraculous instant, I felt on that high Illinois hillside what I can only describe as the presence of God, a divine spirit infused in absolutely everything. Suddenly, I felt myself totally embraced and protected and loved by all that was or ever was to be. It was as if the cool air, the gaily waving grasses, the racing autumnal clouds, the deep azure sky, the majestic geese, the river water shimmering in the sunlight below, and the brightly colored autumnal landscape. It was as if all of creation was wrapping me in a loving embrace, cherishing and protecting me in the arms of something I can only call God. In that moment of unexpected, really, grace and holiness, I felt utterly loved, utterly safe. And I suddenly knew deep to my bones that my life mattered in creation, even though as one human being, I was really so cosmically insignificant and vulnerable, which the Memphis emergency room had taught me I could not change most painful things. The feeling was so intense that I began to weep uncontrollably, something I almost never as a Scottish person did. I just sat there stunned on that beautiful hillside weeping, not sad, but overwhelmed by the beauty and power of the moment, unable and unwilling to move for what seemed like hours, though I don't think it was that long. I don't know how long I sat there in that warm and holy embrace. And when I went down the hill to join the other ministers, I didn't even try to describe to those good old boy ministers already drinking their scotch and bragging about their exploits back home what had spiritually happened to me and how it had blessed and healed me, perhaps even saved me as a young man. It was just all too intense, all too personal and profound. I simply carried that experience as a private epiphany of the heart with me. 3 days later, with the conference over, I drove back to Memphis, to that gray and grimy and chaotic hospital, knowing deep to my bones that I did have the strength of heart for the hard, demanding year ahead. I knew that I could do my work because of the holy powers of creation that I now felt were in and around me. Because of that moment on the hillside, I could stay the course. I could handle the violence and heartache, and I knew I could make a positive difference in creation. And I, in fact, didn't complete that year-long chaplaincy with strength and, I think, purpose. And I've gone on now for more than 50 years doing the same kind of work. This morning, I want to tell you about something called Process Theology, which I suspect will be new to many of you as Unitarian Universalists, although Marge Lane and I have had a correspondence about it. She went to seminary, and I sent her the sermon this week, and we've been talking about process theology together. I have come to believe that whether you are a humanist or a theist or find yourself in some other theological or spiritual place, the framework of process theology can be a useful and important way of spiritually understanding your world and understanding your place in it and your purpose in it. Unitarian Universalist theologian Paul Razor points out that theology at its most basic level is about the way we understand ourselves in relation to the world and one another. It is, he goes on, about the way we describe and relate to whatever we understand as ultimate or holy, that which we experience as worthy of our highest devotion. Process theology, first articulated by British philosopher Alfred North Whitehead early in the last century, and further developed in subsequent decades by Unitarian Universalist theologians Charles Harshorne, Henry Nelson Wyman, and my acquaintance Bernie Loomer, and carried forth today by many other UU thinkers, is just such an attempt to understand our human place in the world, our relationship with what we call the holy. In a nutshell, process theology postulates God not, as so much of traditional Christianity and Judaism does, as some sort of fixed, eternal, perfect, remote, all-powerful and knowing human-like presence in creation, like some grand puppet master pulling the strings to control all earthly events. But rather, process theology understands God as a kind of fluid and mystical presence, an evolving participatory presence and energy sunk down into all that is, a loving and transformative presence in our world which seeks to lure us, an important word, lure us into being partners in the ongoing positive creation of the world. God, then, to a process theologian, is a positive and creative power sunk deep down into all that is, which calls to our hearts and invites our human participation, as the story did for the Time for All Ages, participation in shaping the future of the world in the ways of goodness and compassion, beauty and health. I love the way my colleague, the Reverend Elizabeth Stevens, who is our minister in the college town of Moscow, Idaho, where my old college roommate, Guff Dawes, is a Unitarian to this day. The way she puts this all recently. She suggests that God is not, as many conservative traditions teach, like an angry or demanding parent yelling up the stairs on a late Saturday morning trying to wake you out of your adolescent stupor. But rather, she says, God is more like the aroma of pancakes, wafting up to your bedroom in the early morning hours, gently calling you to wake up, to nourish yourself, and to make something positive and lovely of the day. It's like the aroma of pancakes luring you downstairs. I quote her. In process theology, God, or the spirit of life, or the creative spirit, or goodness or love, insert whatever word works for you, God works like the scent of pancakes in the morning to awaken longings deep in the heart, luring not just people, but luring all creation forward in a continually unfolding process of growing and becoming. God, then, she writes, is what keeps pulling the universe forward, pulling it toward life and love and peace and connection, keeping it from descending into entropy, stagnation, and collapse. And then she ends, God is like the smell of pancakes, luring you downstairs to where you will be nourished. And then she goes on to make an important point that in process theology, God is not some all-knowing, all-powerful, separate cosmic entity running the universe from some sort of master plan. She says, the God of process theology is not in charge. In a universe of free choosers, God can't make anyone or anything do anything, but God does pull on the heartstrings and activates deeper, life-giving, and love-filled longings. And then she goes on, the God of process theology doesn't make rules. Morally, God is ambiguous. And as far the end of the process, God does not know how it's all going to turn out. God is not all-knowing and not all-powerful. God hopes and lures and loves, but God is in the thick of it, just like the rest of us. And then she goes on, God is powerful and essential to the continuance of life, but God is helpless to actually concretely do much of anything beyond luring the universe toward wholeness, toward ultimate goodness, toward unconditional love. And then she ends. So if you believe that God is active in the universe, working like the smell of pancakes to instill longing in our hearts that lure us to the places where we need to go, all you need to do is to lean into that longing. Lean into the longing. Listen to your heart for the direction life is luring you. For the choices you make can help in the creation of a world that is more just, more beautiful, more loving. Process theology then postulates that God is a participatory presence in our world, not all-powerful. And that rather than being some sort of anthropomorphic figure communicating once and for all from on high to us, God is rather right here, right now, standing with us, more of a verb than a noun, beckoning us to know and cherish our world and live in good and loving ways. Listen to the way my colleague, the Reverend Roger Birchhausen, puts all this. So rather than God up in the clouds pulling the strings like some grand puppet master, the God of process theology participates with us in our lives. Parker Palmer succinctly puts it this way: God is in the mess with us. God walks with us not only through the good, but also through the bad. God is a loving, supporting companion in the light and in the darkness. When we are joyous, God is with us. When we are worried, God is with us. When we are suffering, God is with us. For process theologians, Birchhausen goes on, God is not up in the heavens, but is right here in the midst of our lives. The God of process theology is thoroughly immanent, incarnate in us, and between us, and in everything. As theologian Sally McFaig concludes, there is no place God is not. And then Birchhausen ends. God was in Auschwitz, and I would add, God is in Ukraine now. God is in the Grand Canyon at sunrise. God was in Osama bin Laden's soul. God is in your soul, and God is in my soul. God is in everything, and God persuades us toward that which is good and true and loving. Listen to the way another colleague of mine, Matt Alspa, similarly describes the heart of process theology. The God of process theology is not the almighty, all-knowing, perfect, unchanging God of traditional Christianity, but a transformative reality that is like us in the stream of events undergoing change and fully embedded in the universe, deeply connected to each of us. This God, Matt goes on, invites us toward creativity, toward engagement, toward the beauty of the world. We are free, event by event in our lives, to follow or to ignore this calling, this lure toward what is good and beautiful. And when we respond, he goes on, we inform and increase the potential, the possibility for good that is God. This God, unlike the ancient Father God, can suffer with us and can experience joy with us because this God is so closely connected with us. We are drawn toward this process, God, he ends, and in responding, we co-create with God a just world, one ever more full of joy and beauty. Now, to my way of thinking, this God of process theology is a very mystical and elusive construct. It may not be physical enough for you to deal with. It's a fluid and imprecise construct which I personally find very spiritually useful. And it might be spiritually useful for you even if you understand yourself as a humanist or a rationalist and have not much use for God talk in your life. To understand God not as some sort of transcendent being, but rather as a living, breathing, evolving, and vulnerable, mysterious presence among us, as a fragile yet powerful presence sunk deep down in all of creation and in all of human interaction that is available to us as we journey in our everyday relationships toward that which is better than what is now, feels theologically just right to me as a Unitarian Universalist. Maybe because this is, for as long as I can remember, theology has always been for me more a matter of feeling and intuition about my life than logic or argument or concrete proof. If some of the engineers among you don't like this, too bad. When I say, that's an ad lib, I didn't have that written in. When I say the word God in my life, I never think of the God of traditional Christianity. Never. That patriarchal, aloof, all-powerful personality that's somehow up there running the show, deciding which planes crash and who gets cancer, that's spiritual nonsense, and dangerous spiritual nonsense at that. And a majority of people in this country seem to believe it. It's nonsense. When I say the word God, it is usually in a whisper. When I am personally experiencing some magical, transformative, grace-filled moment in my life, and I'm suddenly aware that holy forces are at work. Seeing a parent or a grandparent lovingly cradle a child for the first time. Quietly taking in a spectacular summer sunset with someone I love. Watching a group of people organized to bring more justice into the world, taking care of refugees here in Northern Virginia, or bravely fighting for freedom as are the courageous people of Ukraine. Sitting with my spouse, watching a thunderstorm fill the night sky at our home in the Adirondacks with power and grace, being at the final bedside of someone whose life has been long and beautiful, feeling myself pulled by God knows what in my little life toward goodness, toward generosity and care, despite my selfish instincts. These are all times in my life when the word God or Spirit comes to my lips and helps me believe in the possibilities and promise of this terribly broken world, and give me hope not only for my own little world, but the larger world we all share. Now, I suppose it is true for those of you who have not particularly found the idea or thought of God to be a useful one in your spiritual lives. And my sense is that a lot of Unitarians fall into this category if they describe themselves as humanist or atheist, that the articulations of the process theologians may simply be unnecessary in your spiritual life. And God bless you, pardon the pun, if that's where you find yourself, in a place that doesn't need an understanding of God. I am certain, indeed, that one need not have a concept of God to lead a life of responsibility, joy, compassion, and meaning. But what I personally find spiritual helpful about process theology is that it gives me a concrete spiritual way to understand my world when I see holy and sacred things at work. Yes, there are some other ways to describe what we are seeing when we watch a loving parent cradle a child, or watch a glorious sunset, or join with others to fight injustice, or feel ourselves in our daily life pulled toward goodness and gentleness. Sure, these are all naturalistic phenomena which don't require erudite or complicated theological suppositions. But personally, I find it spiritually fulfilling to believe, as I have since that day on that Illinois hillside, that there is a purposeful and a powerful power in creation embedded in all things, yet equally fragile to me, which is trying to lure me toward goodness, trying to lure the world toward goodness, trying to beg me to participate in my world in ways that make it a better place, more loving, more peaceful, more humane. Personally, it gives me great comfort and hope to feel that there is an evolving, dynamic presence afoot in my creation. Again, not an all-powerful presence, not just something present in happy moments, but a vulnerable presence with great power that quietly drives life's profligate possibilities and is constantly trying to lovingly lure me into places with ever more holiness and purpose. I love the spiritual idea that I am free in this often difficult and painful creation to purposefully lend myself to a reliable holiness that resides, if I will have it, in all moments, all relationships, all choices, all things. So, my dear Reston friends, here is the good news of process theology that I would have each of you consider spiritually this morning, whether you've ever been comfortable with the idea of God or not. The process theologians are not persuaded that there is some sort of Holy Father or Holy Mother even off in the heavenly ether somewhere, unilaterally deciding what is next for us or creation. But there is, they say, a shimmering and reliable holiness in all that is that invites us to both know its positive presence and to participate in its process of helping to move creation toward that which is ever more loving and good, ever more healthy and whole. We all know life is difficult and dangerous, and right now in 2022, it is so worrisome and dark on so many levels, and like it or not, there is plenty of tragedy and pain and cruelty and danger and negation to go around if you want to sink into despair. But the hopeful message of the process theologians is that through it all, no matter what, by God, we human beings are free to respond to the lure and invitation of all that is holy and loving and good. We are free to choose life, to build healthy and caring relationships with everything and everyone that is around us, becoming thusly powerful partners in the world's holiness, moving creation from just where we are in some little corner of it, ever toward a better world. I, for one, can theologically ask for nothing more precious or sustaining than that. I leave you this morning with the words of German theologian Dorothy Soleil, for they give me great comfort and hope. She writes, "To believe in God means to take sides with life and to end our alliance with death. It means to stop killing and wanting to kill. And it means doing battle with apathy, which is akin to killing. It means an end to the fear of dying and to its counterpart, the fear of failure. To take sides with life," she writes, "means to stop looking for some neutral ground between murderers and their victims, and to cease looking upon the world as a supermarket in which we can buy anything we want so long as the price is right and the system is preserved." And then she ends, "To take sides with life and to experience how we can transcend ourselves is a process that has many names and faces. Religion can mean the radical and wholehearted attempt to take sides with life." Amen.
Our hymn this morning, 1052, The Oneness of Everything. If you're joining us from home, please join in singing this beautiful hymn by Jim Scott. Far beyond the grasp of hands, on light to meet the eye, past the reaches of the mind, there find the key to nature's harmony in an architecture so entwined. Like the birds whose patterns great for the oneness of everything. Still, we seek to find a truth that we might understand and reduce to terms defined. Vast and immeasurable time and space, also overwhelmingly designed. All the passing years just might I know the faith that winters in the heart to be reborn in spring, to hear and to feel the pulse of life, enters my soul as a song to sing of the oneness of everything.
A reminder that as we move away from COVID, coffee hour is still outside this morning for you to drink outside. If you get too cold, come on back in and warm up and put your mask back on. But coffee hour, you grab your coffee in the back and go outside, or just stay here and greet one another. I send you on your way with these words from librettist Brian Wren. God is not a she. God is not a he. God is not an it or a maybe. God is a moving, loving, doing, knowing, growing mystery. Amen.
Postlude this morning that Jesse and I will share with you is by Carrie Newcomer, and it's called "And I Do Not Know Its Name." He leaned in and whispered, "Turn the page." He said, "Make yourself into a flame." Crazy old lion with his hair all backlit, grinning like a little boy who has a secret. And I do not know its name, though it's ever entwining. But I believe it must look like an old man shining. We were eating summer peaches by a roadside stand, juice running down like laughter on our chin and on our hands. When we were done, we looked around and smiled at each other. And you said, "Come on, Carrie, let's have another." And I do not know its name, no matter how I try. but I believe that it must taste like peaches eaten by the roadside. He drove a rental car shuttle to the airports on Sundays. We chatted that great morning about the choir he sang with Wednesdays. He sang a haunting gospel hymn, shameless and clear, with only me, a wandering stranger, sitting there to hear. And I do not know its name, elusive and subtle, but I believe that it must sound like that man singing in the shuttle. Standing in the river, barefoot in the current, I hear the sound of a bird call and I try to learn it. The water is a wonder, it's cold and fast and deep. I saw a fish go swimming out too far for me to reach. And I do not know its name, swimmer or watcher, but I believe there is always something moving beneath the water. If holy is a sphere that cannot be rendered, there is no middle place because all of it is center. I do not know its name. I do not know its name. I do not know its name.
Thank you, Julie and Jesse. That was a beautiful song. We invite our congregants attending worship on Zoom to join us for our virtual Greet Your Neighbor Coffee Hour today to discuss the service theme and enjoy fellowship with other congregants. The link is in the chat box and will be on a forthcoming slide. Those here in person are invited to get some coffee or tea, and if you want to brave the outside on the deck to socialize and discuss the service theme. We are going to leave the chairs set up as they are after worship, so please do not stack the chairs. We hope you will use the chat box as a virtual receiving line to leave a message about your appreciation for the worship service. Go in peace, go in kindness, and go in love.